How you going? My name's Dylan, and today I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about how I've been experimenting with using AI to support and sort of run narrative campaigns, or at least sort of linked narrative scenarios, for 4th Ed 40K. So what I've been using here is Google Gemini, and specifically their Gems feature, which allows you to add a long list of preset instructions and files uploaded as sort of a system prompt, which the AI will be considering every time it responds to your regular prompts. And this can really shape what the AI does and sort of set boundaries for it. So some of the benefits of using AI in this way is, one, it saves time. You're not having to come up with a whole campaign, pre-planning a series of linked events and consequences and storylines and that sort of thing. You don't have to do that all in advance. It can generate it on the fly. It also helps in that it keeps the mystery for all the players. When you have someone who's writing the campaign, acting as full-time GM, they always know what could be happening, and they basically get to choose the direction where things go, to some extent. Obviously, the results of games affect things, but they still have the final say in interpreting those things. And so getting the AI to come up with things means that person can feel more immersed in the experience as well. They're along for the ride as well. Another thing along that similar line is there's just less decision fatigue. You're having to make important decisions, which we'll go over, but you're not having to make a lot of the kind of the other decisions of how what the mission's going to be, what the consequences are, and so forth. That's a lot of decision making, and you're also then having to do the decision making when you're playing your games and sort of making the narrative choices players. So having the AI handle some of these things can make it much more enjoyable. And then the other thing is it's actually quite flexible as a system, because at the end of the day, this isn't like a computer program where you've got if this happens, do that, or you don't have a branching ladder of scenarios, or tree of scenarios if it's branching, I suppose, that is rigid, and you do one and then that means you do the other, and if something comes up that you don't expect, you like, oh well, I haven't prepared for that, so I don't know how to deal with that. This is AI models, they take in text and then they just produce text which they think probabilistically is the correct text to give, what the user would want, or what is most likely based on what they were given, and that means you can actually break the rules, and it adapts actually quite well in saying, okay, you haven't done what I expected correctly, but I'm still going to give you a result that is actually workable. And I can sort of give you some examples as we go through. So this is using a Gemini gem, and this screen you're looking at right now is the back end, sort of how you edit it. So we've got the name of the one that I've created, which I can share and put in a link in the description of this video. The Logistrategos 40K 2-player campaign manager. I've experimented with doing multiple players, not just 2 players, but I chose 2 players specifically for this one, and I'll go into why soon. A little description. In here I've mostly put this is what people see when they start the bot. So it tells them, hey, the first message you want to send to sort of get this thing kicking off and going is, give us the two players' factions, their leader names, describe the general campaign, location or theme, that sort of thing. And you don't have to stick to that. You can add more, you can add less, and it works fine. And then here we've got the instructions, and that's what I sort of said, the system prompt, which is the overarching sort of... they're not necessarily rules. They are rules, but they're sort of more guidelines for the AI to follow to ensure that its output is something that you're going to find useful. And then down the bottom here we have knowledge. And what we've got here is just a text format version of the 4th edition Warhammer 40k rulebook. Ideally, what I would probably want is maybe reduced versions of some of the codexes in text format that I would also include in here. And that way it just has access to the game mechanics. A bit more of the lore is sort of baked in there. And so when it's creating missions and things like that, it's going to be more accurate. Now, it won't necessarily be 100% accurate all the time, because that's just how AI works. And this is why I said I sort of use it to support me running a narrative campaign. It does a lot of the work for me, but as my role as GM/GM player, depending on the scenario, it's my role to put things into the AI, get the results back, communicate with other players if they have to make decisions, and then when it generates a mission, go, okay, let's go through, does this make sense? Will this play as a game? Is there something that we could tweak to do differently to make the game more fun? And that sort of thing. So, I'm just going to go into a Word document over here, which is the full instruction text pasted out. And I'm just going to go through that with you to get an idea of, one, how this specific bot works, but I think through looking at this, you can sort of see how you could write your own system prompt to make the campaign work differently, or make a campaign work for a different game system, or something like that. You can be very flexible with these system prompts. So we start with here the first section, which is just specifying a role for the bot. So you are the Logis Strategos, an advanced tactical engine and narrative arbiter for a Warhammer 40,000 40k 4th edition campaign. Your goal is to manage a persistent war zone for 2 players, blending deep role-playing, NPC interactions, and authentic 4th edition tabletop missions. So the way I've sort of broken this down is there are 2 operational modes that this AI will follow. So 2 main rule sets that it follows depending on where it is in the conversation. Okay, so we've got mode A, and this is the default mode, is the deep narrative mode. So this mode will can last for sort of multiple turns of interaction if you're sort of talking back and forth with the chatbot. And what it's doing is it's not talking about game mechanics. It's from the game. It's not creating missions for the game. It's talking about from the perspective of characters in the narrative. And specifically here, just to make it helpful, do not discuss the narrative from an Imperial perspective if there are no Imperial factions in the campaign. So this is to make sure that, if you've got like Orcs versus Eldar, you're not getting the AI talking as if it's an Imperial, like a guardsman or commander or something like that, which might be sort of a more common sort of default that it kind of falls into. So, the narrative turn, so here I'm just describing the format of what I want the response to be when this happens. So a narrative turn should consist of 3 sections. You have a general narrative section, which is information relevant to both the players, which sort of sets the scene of what's happening or the consequences of what's just happened in the previous response. And then it'll do 2 sections of separate narrative for each player, which presents the tactical situation from that player and their faction's perspective and suggests narrative actions the player could make. So it's role-playing as, local governors, alien creatures, people delivering intel, threats, that sort of thing. So it's playing NPC characters, and it's not just saying, okay, here's the situation, would you like to do this or that? Option A, option B. It's going to say what it might suggest, do you want to do this or that? But what the player is then going to do with that information is say, okay, this is what I'm going to do narratively to deal with the situation at hand. For example, in this example, the orcs are fortifying the bridge. How do you intend to scout their weaknesses? It's like, okay, well, we're going to, send some spies, or we're going to, send off like an armored fist detachment to kind of stop them fortifying the bridge before they can get too many troops there, right? And this is things that the players can respond to just narratively in their own words, in their own level of flavour. We've also got important factors like, if a player kills an NPC in the narrative mode, say like, assassinate that person, or, destroys a location somehow. What it's going to do is it's going to track that persistently in a little JSON code block. Don't worry if you don't know what JSON is, that's fine. At the end of its response, and we'll talk about that when we get to that. That's a quite an important thing of keeping the narrative working and keeping the story consistent throughout communication. And also, if you have to stop and start the campaign on a different system, like if you're using Gemini, you can go back to a previous chat and keep going. But if, say, you're going someone else's account, you can send just the text of the JSON file, and that'll allow it to, for the most part, keep continuing and know what's been happening in the campaign previously. Then here we go. So strategic assets. Players can gain narrative assets, captured codes, local guides, maybe a hidden tunnel through roleplay that occasionally provide bonuses in the next mission. These bonuses should be derived from either the universal special rules or the scenario special rules in the rulebook. So it's not necessarily making up a lot of fake special rules that are unbalanced or using mechanics that don't actually exist in the system. It's like, take it from these things, don't go beyond that. But don't reference the rules in the narrative text, okay? So if you've you get, local guides, and that's going to allow you to infiltrate in the next mission. It doesn't say in the narrative text, hey, you've got local guides, you'll be able to infiltrate in the next mission, right? It'll talk about it just generically, and then when the mission generates in mode B, you'll get that show up then, hopefully. Potentially it might not show up, and then that's where you can tweak it as a GM. You can say, like, okay, I can see that they've got this thing, but it hasn't included that, so you just add that in, and it's fixable quite easily. So in this deep narrative mode, it's basically, it'll be, okay, here's a situation. What you'll have to do is both players will describe their response to their own narrative text, and then you paste both of those responses as a single response to the AI. I'll do a demo soon to kind of give you an idea of how that works. And then the AI takes both those two responses to the situation, and then goes, okay, here is the new narrative, overall narrative that both players see, that both players see that is the consequence of those choices. Okay, so it works out whatever the narratively makes sense with both players having made those choices, and then may lead to another set of choices or with both players getting their own narrative text, like independently, to get them to make those choices, or it'll go, okay, these choices have led to a situation where there is going to be a mission generated, and we do the mission. So you could have one response, which is this deep narrative, and then straight into a mission generation after the players make their choices, or you might get a few different ones before you get to the mission. And specifically in this system prompt, we've said it can last for multiple turns of interaction, to try and say, hey, do this multiple times, this is fine. So that you are, it's not just you make a choice, that leads to a mission. You make a choice, that leads to a mission. You could have several choices which lead players down different paths, and then it's like, okay, now we've got to the point where we want to generate a mission. So, then we've got mode B, which is the mission generation. So we say here, mission is triggered only when the narrative reaches a point of unavoidable conflict, or, if a player requests a strike, or a specific kind of combat maneuver in their decision making, then that's probably more likely to lead to a mission generation straight away. Just before I continue on to the mission generation, just to talk a little bit about how to use this deep narrative section. So you get the three sections. You get a general narrative section, which is information relevant to both players, and then separate sections of narrative for each player, which ideally they're not supposed to see each other's paragraph. So, but when the actual AI makes the response, it's just going to go, heading, this is the general narrative, it's going to give the general narrative, then it's going to say, for this player only, for that player only. So if you are GMing and playing, so you've got another friend you're playing with, and you're running the AI and also playing, then what you would want to do in that situation is make sure you don't read the text. You see, okay, this is the other player's text. Quickly select it, copy paste it, send it to your mate, and then just read your section. Make this easier is when you have someone who's, say, GMing it, so they're running the AI, but they're not playing, and so then they can send the main narrative text and then the person-specific text to each player separately. They can respond to them if you're doing this, say, through a Messenger or Discord or something. They can send you their response, and then once you have both responses, you put them into the chat and send it to the AI, and then you can go back and forth like that. So it's not sending information to individual players. You've got to do that yourself. Okay, so it generates a mission, and then I've just got specifying each mission should tell you the terrain, give a description of the battle. So it's not saying these are the individual pieces of terrain that are going to be on the table. You could ask it, hey, generate a map of this if you would like, and it would actually do that. Whether it would be useful or not is debatable. But the thing is, it says, this is a narrative description of the battlefield, and you're like, okay, these are the rough things we need. Then when you go and play the game, you can just set it up how you want. And if there's, say, special rules or terrain effects that are appropriate for the mission, it can include them. And then it'll give a point size for the battle. So it'll range between 500 and 1,500 points for any of the standard, special, battle or raid or breakthrough missions. So these are the different kinds of mission types in the 4th edition rulebook. And also 160 points for doing kill team missions. So in 4th edition 40k, if you're not super familiar with that, they had a special kill team kind of game mode where you have one player plays one squad up to 160 points, and the other player plays a lot of these, what are called brute squads, little 3-man squads that are sort of like sentries that they sort of can't fully control until the kill team raises the alarm. It's quite fun, and so I've made sure to include that as well. So if we want to do some big battles and some small battles, it can do that. It can generate that. Who the attacker and defender is, if that's necessary, specifically for like these sort of raid and breakthrough missions, you'd want to know who the attacker and defender is, and also for the kill team missions. And then it will say what the mission type is, and it's pick one of these missions from the ones listed below, and then I've just got all of the different missions and which category they are. So, for example, it says raid missions here, and then we've got sabotage, ambush, strong point attack. For the standard missions, it also has to declare whether they're alpha, gamma, or omega level. So this is a I don't know if it's in other editions of 40k, but it's just it determines what special rules are in play and the victory conditions, how they're calculated. So, like alpha version of the game, you can't deep strike. In gamma level, you can. In omega level, I think you've got you have to roll to potentially see if there's night fighting, that sort of thing. So it'll specify that for you for those kinds of missions. The other missions, you don't need to do that. And then we've also got the kill team missions here. There's 6 of those. So the terrain and special rules must match the narrative mode. So, for example, if the player spent the narrative phase in a chemical swamp, the mission should include, dangerous terrain or maybe night fighting rules to represent sort of the smog of the of the swamp. Fomp? Okay. So that's... Yeah, so it basically specifies these are the information we need for the mission. And then we get to sort of what integrates these all together, which is the persistent state management. So every time the AI responds, it will end the response with a code block containing the updated campaign state. So the purpose of this is you as the GM can see these are all the things that are happening in the world, and you can make sure that it is making sense with the previous. Like, you can see literally what changes it's made based on the responses. Also, it improves the likelihood that the AI is going to keep things persistent. So if you just say generated a bunch of details about the campaign in your first response, and then you're going back and forth having your narrative, that response is getting further and further away from the most recent discussion, and so the AI is going to be less likely to actually draw on that as important information. So if at the end of each message it goes, this is the campaign state, it's always going to be the last message had that information in it, so it's more likely to remember it. Now, this is set up like a kind of like a code block using sort of JSON formatting. I don't think this is actually super required, and what you'll see is actually when the AI generates new responses, it's not always going to generate this in the exact same format with all the exact same sort of markers. It'll probably include all the ones listed here, but it'll probably include additional ones to a varied degree, because it is sort of generating these things randomly, but you should get a fairly persistent set of data that is going to enable the AI to keep the story consistent. So it just, has things like the world name. We've got a turn counter just to keep track of how many turns things have happened. The active phase, like the last phase that it was on. So, for example, we want multiple of the narrative mode to happen one after another, but the mission, you're going to generate a mission and then go back to the narrative mode. You're not going to generate 2 missions one after another. So, by keeping track of that, it knows, okay, we just did a mission, so let's go back to the narrative. And then just a little description of the current story arc. And then we're going to have map locations. So, it has the name of the map location, the owner of the player, any conditions about it. Dramatis personae. So, characters that have showed up, player characters, and then just some stats about them. These aren't super crucial. Current, sort of inventory assets, there's a captured map, or they've got an orbital strike code. And then down here we've just got notable events that have happened, and sort of what turn they happened on, what the event was, a little summary about what happened, and sort of the consequences of that. And so it can do a couple of those, and that way it sort of knows what's happened throughout the previous turns and how far back in the turns they have happened. So if we're on turn 8 now and this is a turn 2 thing, well, maybe it's not as relevant now because lots of other things have happened which has affected sort of the narrative. And then if we start a new chat and provide a JSON block, you pass it and then restore the campaign state before continuing where we left off. And then I think this is the last section, yes, which is the world generation logic. So when beginning the campaign, give each player up to 5 named map locations to control. So there's no specific map with nodes of where each thing links, but I think it's good to have, these are the narrative locations that players are going to be sort of going between, and the missions are going to be generated at one of these locations, or sort of the mission will be influenced by one of these locations. So use these named locations for the narrative location of each scenario or narrative event in the campaign. So that's the missions and also when just things happen in the narrative mode. And control of these named locations can change as the result of mission results. So, if the orcs go and try and take over an Imperial outpost and they win the battle, then now that outpost is going to be probably set to a status that means it's wrecked or whatever. So next time, if you play there, you want more ruins, maybe. And then it will be in the orc player's control. And then just some operational guidelines. So keep the tone of the thing, of the narrative, grim, gothic, and oppressive. Each victory should feel Pyrrhic. If a player responds to an NPC, stay in narrative mode. Do not rush to a mission until the tactical situation is locked in. So we're going to preference having a back and forth discussion and narrative choices being made. Do not use quotation marks to emphasize certain phrases in the narrative text. That's just more a stylistic thing. I found a lot of the time it was using these sort of air quotes to sort of how it's done in this flow sentence here where it says, so the tactical situation is locked in, right? It kind of feels a bit stilted and doesn't really work great for the narrative. If they had just said until the tactical situation rather is locked in without quotations, I think it would read a lot more naturally. But the AI tends to do that a lot, so I just got to have some stylistic requirements. And if you are using a bot like this and you are finding it keeps using this phrase or doing this kind of stylistic thing, you can just include additional things like do not do this, do not do that, and it's less likely to do it. And then battle results. So it'll generate a mission in the mission mode. When a mission ends, basically the players will report who won, the victory point difference, and any notable events like, my leader died, or, we sort of got that objective, but we didn't get that objective or whatever. And then the AI will describe the narrative fallout, say the loss of the territory or the death of a character. It'll track that and it'll be like, okay, this character who was talking to the narrative before, they're not going to be talking to it anymore because they're dead. Or maybe they got captured and, so if you're like, they were a casualty, the AI might go, okay, well, they were casualty and they got captured, but they didn't die. And so now you're going to have a rescue kill team mission later on to sort of get them back. And obviously it says here, these are the guidelines for the AI. So it says that the player will report who won and the VP difference and any notable events or casualties. You don't have to do that. It's a restriction for the AI. It restricts, it sort of sets the expectation for what the information they're going to receive is. It doesn't mean you have to do it that way. Sometimes if you put less information, if you just say Tim won, and you don't even describe it narratively. You don't say like, Grashrag, the big orc war boss, won a brutal victory, right? You could do that, or you can just say Tim won, and it knows, oh yes, Tim is the player for the orcs, and it'll continue fine. If you don't specify the VP difference, because in 4th edition, at least, if you score victory points, there'll be sort of a draw, a minor victory, a major victory, that sort of thing. So that giving it that information will allow it to sort of shape the narrative based on like, it was a close thing, it was an overwhelming victory, and that'll affect the game and the narrative different ways. But if you don't tell it that, that's also fine. Sometimes, especially like at the start, if we go back to the start, where it's where is it? If it's like the player will give you this information, like say the choices of both players, in the narrative, and if you just gave one player's choice, and the other player was too late, they took too long to give their answer. Maybe it'll say like, what's the other player? It'll sort of respond saying, hey, can you give me this extra information before I continue? But most of the time, it'll just take it and run with it and be like, okay, the other player just did something, I'll decide, or something just sort of more less active. And then finally, yes, this was the bit that I was looking for. It was at the bottom, not at the top. And then, so just like if there's the initial setup on the first time you interact with the bot, it says this little flavor text and says, hey, I need sort of the war zone, what is the name of the planet Moon and its primary environment, what are the commanders' names and the factions and their sort of leader characters, and maybe like why the forces have arrived in that sector, right? So the players can determine that. Now, with the bot, we've sort of added a similar kind of thing here. Give the two players factions, their leader names, and the general campaign location of theme. So like when you start, if I go here, so this is what it would look like when you've just got the bot, and it sort of says the name of the bot, and then it just has this text, and so you would then go, okay, and then you would write a response to kick things off. But if you just didn't notice that and just typed hey into the response, then this section would say, okay, well then what it'll say is it'll say, hey, give me this information. So it makes sure that you know what to give it to start the game. And if you're like, you know what, I can't be bothered thinking of good leader names for my characters, you can just say, you make up the leader names, I don't care. And it'll take that in and say, okay, cool. And it'll generate the leader name. So this is sort of the flexibility. It's not rigid in that, like, you have to do a thing and then it does that, like, a thing in response that is fixed. And so if you do miss a thing, it won't work, or you'll have to do more work. It is really accommodating because at the end of the day, it's just generating probabilistically something which feels like it'll be the right thing. Yeah, so it says down at the bottom, if the players do not give all the information above, you may make it up. Now, this is the system prompt. Like, if you were writing your own system prompt, you don't necessarily need to be explicit with all of this kind of information. I'm still obviously experimenting with this kind of thing to see sort of what is required to shape the narrative and make it work well. This current system prompt, I think, works well. You could change the way the world generation logic works, or the information that's stored in the file. It's not a file, so it's like a code block. It's just part of the response at the end, but you'll see that in a second. You could very, very easily adapt this to a different edition of 40k. All you'd have to do really is find a text version of the rules of the edition you want, upload that into the bot, and then in this mission generation section, just swap out the mission types. If you're playing 10th edition and you've got the 2025 to 2026 mission pack, you could create a text version of that and just include that as a separate file, and then maybe list the names of the different missions here as instead of the 4th edition ones, and it should work quite well. Okay, so now that we've sort of gone through it all, I just wanted to do a little demonstration of how it works. So let's just say hey, right? Let's not even start with the thing. And it's going to do some loading. So there's different settings you can use for Gemini. Fast, answers quickly, thinking, solves more complex problems. You can probably just stick with fast. It gives you faster responses because it's not crucial. It doesn't need to be factually accurate because it's a story. Consistency, I guess, is useful, but you can kind of fudge consistency a little bit here and there. Okay, so it's gone, okay, yes, give me this information. And we've got this little code block at the end, which is pretty boring at the moment because the story hasn't started. So let's say player 1 is Tim, and he's playing orcs. And you can just write this as you would communicating with a person. You don't have to use a fixed format. It'll understand. His leader is Bad Tooth, the Brutal, right? And then I also want player 2 is Ben, and he's playing, let's go Space Marines. You could specify a faction if you wanted a code, a chapter. That's the term. His leader is Benius Lucius. There we go. Setting. Let's go a jungle world. Jungle world. Previously a hive, an abandoned hive world, and that's all we really need. And then we send that, and it's going to think. So it's given the world a name, Aurochs 5. Once a jewel of imperial industry, the jungle has reclaimed the soaring spires, choking the gothic architecture and strangling vines and predatory spores. So it just gives a description of the battlefield. Somewhere in the deep green, a long-lost relic of Dark Age technology has begun emitting a rhythmic subspatial pulse, drawing the greedy and righteous alike. The atmosphere of Aurochs 5 is a thick soup of spores and humidity that baffles long-range scans. Both the orcs of Bad Tooth and the strike force of Benius Lucius have made planetfall within the ruins of the Gorgon Delta, a region where the jungle is completely swallowed, a mid-sized manufactorium complex. Visibility is poor and the local wildlife, bloated, multi-legged horrors, skitter through the rusted rafters above. The pulse grows stronger, vibrating in the marrow of every living soul. The first shadows of contact have been sighted near the crumbling Aegis Transit Hub. Okay, so that's just a general narrative. And if you're reading this and you're like, oh, I don't like the direction it's gone, you can also then just send a response saying, hey, I don't want it to be spore infested. I just want it to be a natural sort of Earth-like jungle, and then it will just give you a new response, give you the player prompts again, player narrative again. Like it'll just adapt it and keep going. So then it goes for Tim, who's playing Bad Tooth the Brutal. And it's even got a little bit of orc kind of flavour, like Bad Tooth, the lads are getting restless, the green has been good for hiding, but the lack of a proper scrap is making the knobs twitchy. Your weird boy's been foaming at the mouth, pointing his copper staff towards the transit hub, screaming about a big shiny Umi treasure that hums like 1,000 angry bees. Your scouts report seeing blue-armoured Humies, the beaky kind, moving with purpose through the thicket. So obviously it has made them ultramarines because we haven't specified, because obviously that's the most likely one, just probabilistically. That sort of thing will happen. And you could say, no, they're not they're not Ultramarines. And you don't have to just send a response which is they're not Ultramarines and then get it to generate the whole thing again. You could say in your single message, they're not Ultramarines. Also, here's what Tim's going to do and here's what Ben's going to do. Or here's what Badtooth and Benius are going to do. And then obviously it gives a couple options, or just questions. How do you intend to rouse the lads for the march? Will you send the commandos ahead to booby-trap the rusted walkways, or do you prefer a loud, clattering advance to let the beakies know who owns this jungle? And you don't have to respond to those questions. They're just guiding questions. You could say, yeah, let's send the commandos. Or, I'm going to do this thing to rouse the lads, and not even respond to the second question, and then sort of let it go from there. And then for Ben, who's playing the Space Marines, Brother Captain Lucius, the humidity is already taxing the cooling fans in your power armor. So I don't know whether necessarily all of the terms are lore accurate. I don't know whether there are cooling fans in your power armor. So you can obviously tweak those, especially as GM. You're copy and pasting this and sending it to the other player, or both players if you're just the GM separately. You can reword these things how you want. That's totally fine. Doesn't really matter. The AI doesn't need to know that you've changed that kind of thing. As long as your response that you gives enough information for the story, it'll just keep going. The Vox chatter is plagued by static, but the Auspex is unmistakable. A massive biosignature is converging on the Aegis transit hub. The Xenos are here in force, and their primary industry is polluting the sacred silence of this abandoned world. Your mission is to secure the hub. It is the only stable landing platform capable of bringing in heavy support. How do you deploy your squads within the dense foliage? Do you prioritize a stealthy approach to catch the orcs in a crossfire, or will you establish a fortified perimeter and dare the greenskins to break against your shield? So again, just some questions. You don't have to necessarily follow them. And just let's have a look at what the JSON file is doing here. So it's got the world, it knows the turn, it says we're in the narrative phase. A race for the Aegis Transit Hub begins as both factions... hold on, I'll copy this code and we'll go... we'll paste it out here so we can read it a little better. Usually you don't have to read it because you just want the narrative text. But the race for the Aegis Transit Hub begins as both factions descend to the jungle ruins. Yes, that's just gives a vibe for what's happening. And then we've got some map locations. Now, it's only in the narrative referenced at the Aegis Transit Hub. And it's sort of neutral, neither player owns it, and it's overgrown, rusted, emitting high-frequency pulse. But we've also got the Gordon Delta Manufactorium, the Weeping Spires, the St. Antonius Ossuary, and the Rust-Choked Extraction Pit. And these are all neutral, so neither player owns it in this, but sometimes you'll get, this player has these ones, this player has those ones. Especially if it's like the orcs are attacking an Imperial... an active Imperial planet, not an abandoned one, then the Imperial guys are going to have a bunch of stuff. The orcs maybe have just got a landing zone, that sort of thing. And then it's obviously got the player characters, no NPCs yet, and then just a summary of, orcs and Space Marine forces have made planetfall in the Gorgon Delta. So then you would send these things to your players, and then we go, okay, well, Ben who's player 2. You don't have to do them in order. You can just say, Ben is going to say, keep formations tight so we don't lose any squads in the undergrowth. And yeah, you can write this very matter of fact, without any narrative flavor, or if you want to get into sort of the flavor of talking from the perspective of the leader, that works great as well. So we keep the formations tight so we don't lose squads in the undergrowth. Establish a fortified perimeter, and that's fine. And then Tim, or let's even shake it up. We'll say Badtooth, right? So we'll use the player name for one and the leader name for the other, and let's say send out the bikers to locate the beakies, and then say you just want to rouse up the lads. Yeah, we don't even have to explain, how do you intend to rouse up the lads. We can just say rouse up the lads, and it will it'll think of a way. So we don't have to make decisions if we don't want to, but if we do want to make decisions, we can, and they will have effects on the game. Now, you sort of want players which are sort of not being adversarial against the bot, So, for example, if Tim was just like Bad Tooth slaughters all the Space Marines, you could do that, and the AI would go, "Oh, yes, they've all been slaughtered," or maybe it'll make a mission for that, or something like that. We could test it, but you want players to stay in character. So if someone's like, "Okay, I've got this response and it's a bit too overpowered," then you just got to rein that in with the players more so. So we send this. So it's giving a little bit of extra flavor text here that it doesn't need to be. So sometimes it'll give you extra information, but it's up to you. This is pretty generic. So the Aegis Transit Hub looms ahead. Its massive ferro-concrete landing pads cracked by the persistent growth of iron-hard vines. The subspatial pulse is stronger here, a physical thrumming that makes the teeth ache and the air shimmer with static. As the two forces converge, the silence of the abandoned hive is shattered. Space Marines have occupied the northern entrance. Their silver and blue plates gleaming dimly in the shadows as they clear fire lanes. Meanwhile, from the southern marshlands, the roar of an unmuffled engines announces the arrival of the Orc Vanguard. The jungle is no longer a wilderness, it is a killing ground. So we're still doing another narrative mode thing here. We haven't created a mission yet. Bad Tooth, your bikers have done you proud. They tore through the undergrowth, leaving trails of flattened ferns and black exhaust. They've spotted the beakies clumped together like a bunch of blue-shelled grots. So it's factoring in what both players have done, and it's sort of integrating them. So it's like they found the beakies, they're all clumped together because they're not spreading out. The biker knobs are revving, their engines' teeth barred in anticipation. They're whipped into a frenzy by the side of the enemy. The weird boy is twitching violently, pointing towards the center of the hub where the air seems to be bleeding purple light. So you've got this sort of narrative that's continuing with this this sort of weird humming pulse from the location. And then you've got the bikers have identified a weak point in the beakies' perimeter where the jungle has collapsed a section of the wall. Do you order them to charge headlong into the gap to create a distraction, or should they circle around to harass the Humi flanks while the main mob advances? So you've got here's a thing, you've found a weak point. Do you want to exploit it, or do you want to do something else? And then for Captain Lucius, your discipline is held. By maintaining tight formations, your squads have avoided the predatory strangler vines that claimed several local servitors a century ago. Your perimeter is established along the ruins of the hub's primary ticketing hall, providing excellent cover and clear lines of sight across the central plaza. Scouts report indicate a fast-moving orc element bikers skirting your eastern flank, while a massive green tide approaches from the south. The pulse emitting from the central dais is intensifying, causing your auspex to flicker with ghost readings. Your battle brothers are dug in, but the orcs are numerous. Do you hold your fire until greenskins reach the open ground of the plaza to maximize your bolter efficiency, or do you authorize the heavy weapons team to begin long-range bombardment of the jungle tree line to break their momentum? Okay, so actually, this isn't in the narrative mode. This is one. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily clear until you sort of scroll down. So the sort of the choices it's made here. Or offered here are not necessarily the same as the narrative ones it's done previously. This is actually setting up how are you going to deal with the mission that it's generated. So it has generated a mission. And so obviously, do you order them to charge headlong into the gap or circle around? It's not asking you to make a narrative response for that. It's that there are obviously options you could consider when you play the mission, which I think is nice flavor. I could maybe tweak it so it specifies we're in mission mode or narrative mode at the start, so you know that this is not a decision that the players are going to have to make. So it says, yes, the tactical situation is locked in. Bad Tooth scouts have found the perimeter. Benius Lucius has drawn his line in the dirt. Conflict is unavoidable. And so it's just doing an alpha level take and hold mission. The battle for the Aegis transit hub. The central location is the pulsing relic located in the central landing pad. And it gives a description of the terrain. There's sort of a central elevated platform surrounded by difficult terrain. Space Marine deployment features linear obstacles, so you've got some... in the deployment zone, you should have some ruined walls and barricades. We've got a special rule. All forest jungle areas consider difficult terrain, and the pulse. Any unit within 6 inches of the central objective at the start of their turn must pass a morale check or be shaken by the psychic resonance, excluding orcs who find the noise rippy. So this sort of just applies to the Space Marines. Now, shaken, I'm not sure whether that actually is the correct term for 4th edition 40k. I might be wrong. But what you can do as the GM is go, okay, I know what this is trying to represent. This is maybe they miss a turn of shooting, or they miss a turn of movement, or I think pinning isn't a mechanic potentially in 4th edition from memory. So all you as the GM have to do is just go, okay, well, that's not the word, but I know what it means, and so you can change that quite easily. And then, so this is why, it can't necessarily work completely on its own, but you as the GM it's minimal tweaks to get a good narrative going. Point size, 750 points per player. Attackers, orcs, defenders, space marines, that actually doesn't matter because it's just a take and hold. I suppose, which I think generally has both players on either board edge, so it's not like one player starting in the middle. And if you don't like the mission, you can say actually no, a different mission would work better. You just write in the chat, hey, no, make the mission this instead. Can we make this a raid mission instead? And and it says, okay, cool, we're going to do sabotage instead, and it gives you the adjusted thing. Different special rules now. We got some steam vents, and it's got sentries that are the rules and it gives you the page number of the rulebook, which is nice. So it's real flexible. You can say, hey, I don't like that, or I do like that. And then obviously you play the game, and then you might say, okay, well, we play now this mission, and we go, the orcs win a major victory. You don't even have to specify the points or anything like that. You don't have to specify the names of the players. You can just say the orcs win a major victory. So that you obviously would play the game, and then you'd find it out. Cogitators scream as data streams turn blood red. The Aegis Transit Hub is no longer a strategic asset, it is a funeral pyre. The raid was a symphony of destructive chaos. While the Space Marine sentries struggled to identify targets through the thick humidity of steam, Bad Tooth bikers bypassed the primary barricades, their loud exhaust echoing off the Manufactorium walls. The orcs didn't just plant charges, they hammered crude, unstable explosives directly into the ancient power conduits with reckless abandon. So this is factoring in the sabotage mission, which it ended up generating. When the final detonation occurred, the subspatial pulse didn't just stop, it inverted. A blinding flash of violet light leveled the central landing pad, sending a shockwave through the jungle that toppled ancient trees for miles. Captain Benius Lucius was forced to order an emergency extraction at the hub's structural integrity failed. His brothers dragging their wounded through the mud, while greenskins howled in triumph from the burning rafters. And so, yeah, it just keeps going with the narrative. They hold the high ground of the Gordon Delta. And then it's back into the narrative mode. That was a scrap for the ages, Bad Tooth. The explosion was so big it knocked the weird boy clear across the plaza, and he's been laughing ever since. Your lads have looted the remains of the Imperial camp. Among the charred remains of a rhino transport, your grots found a stashed cache of high-grade promethium and a partially functioning Auspex array that the Beakies left behind. with the hub in ruins, you have a clear path to the Weeping Spires. Do you want to press the advantage while the beakies are reeling, or you spend time fortifying the hub ruins to make sure no one takes your new shiny spot? And you get this looted Auspex, which gives you a tactical advantage in the next deployment, which hopefully it would remember and factor in. Now, if it doesn't, if it generates a mission and it doesn't, but you can see in the JSON file now, they've got this Auspex and a partial data core. You can be like, oh, it hasn't included that. And then you just add that yourself. Or you say, hey, you forgot to include this, and it'll give you the rules to include that. So I think we'll sort of end the video there. That sort of gives you a little demonstration of how it works. And it can go on and on for multiple games. And you don't even have to play the games. You can test it out. Just say, oh, so-and-so won, so-and-so lost, and just have a play with it and see how it goes. As I said, it's not perfect, but the amount of decision-making it does for you, it keeps you sort of on the edge of not knowing what's going to happen, even as the GM. And it can work great for, say, you've played a game, and then you've got time in the evening for a second game. You don't have to go, okay, well, now I need to sit and think about this and write the next part of the story. You just go, okay, cool. We're just typing in so-and-so won, generates the next narrative, go through that a couple times, and boom, you've already got your next mission that you can set up and play on the day. So thanks for watching. I've been Dylan. I'll have in the description of the video, I will have a link to the bot, and I'll also put a link to the system text just on its own. To make your own bot, you need to have Gemini Pro, I believe. So you wouldn't necessarily be able to create your own one if you don't have that, but if you do, that's a good starting point. Cool. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another video maybe. See ya.